Hey, what's up, stock compounders? Brad here. So I got an interesting message in Twitter today from Bill. Pointed me to this podcast episode from Phil and Danielle Town on the InvestED podcast. It turns out Phil Town has sold out entirely of Boeing. Okay, now that's a pretty big deal. I've been tracking Phil Town's Rule 1 portfolio for about a year and a half now. And Boeing, as of the last quarter, the second quarter of 2021, was the third largest holding in the Rule 1 fund. So in this podcast episode, which just dropped 16 hours ago, Phil Town talks about why he sold out of Boeing. Now, this and the last episode talk about the Rule 1 event checklist. Okay, this is a checklist for investments that are driven by events that cause the stock to go on sale. Now, the fifth item on the checklist is the event solution will not require adding debt. Okay? The event solution will not require adding debt. And to expand on that, Phil Town gets into Boeing. So I'll share some of his highlights from this podcast episode. So that applies to Boeing, right? He decided to exit Boeing, sold at around $220 per share. Looks like the current price of Boeing is less than that, so he sold at $220. Boeing added recently $63 billion worth of debt. Okay, that is huge for Boeing. I mean, if you look at the financials going back to 2012, you look at total debt, I mean, they were around 10, 9, 11, 13, somewhere in that ballpark. They were net debt negative, which means they were cash positive, at least going back as far as 2012 up through 2016. And you can see 1, 5, okay, 18, big jump, all right? Currently $42 billion in net debt on the books for Boeing. And so Phil Town sees this, and he thought, they're going to retire the debt when Boeing sells off all the airplanes sitting on the ground, right? Because of the pandemic, there just weren't airplanes being sold. But what Phil Town noticed is as those airplanes got sold, Boeing did not pay off the debt. Okay, they did not retire the debt. The debt obligation, net cash, is over twice as big as they've ever had in their history, is a quote from Phil Town. So now the management team, they seem to keep running into problems, all right? Phil Town makes the analogy, there's never one cockroach in the kitchen. Okay, if you see a cockroach, there's probably more. And that's how he sees management in terms of problems popping up. The problems just keep coming, right? So that's a concern. Boeing is losing market share to Airbus, hand over fist, all right? So that's a concern, right? They're losing market share to a competitor. If this wasn't almost a monopoly company, all right, that's how Phil Town sees Boeing. It's almost a monopoly, pretty much effectively a monopoly. If it wasn't almost a monopoly company, I would be nervous for anyone who owns it. Now it is almost a monopoly company. So he thinks there's fairly low risk, but he's lost his conviction on it. Okay? Continuing. I don't know what these guys are doing or if they even know what they're doing. Talking about the management team at Boeing. I don't want to own a company like that. Building modern airplanes today is extremely complex. It's a 10-year cycle, right? From when you start building the airplane to when you have the finished product, a 10-year cycle. And it's obviously not that difficult to make a mistake that plagues you for the next 10 years. All right, we're seeing that with Boeing. While the management team will most likely figure their way out of this, the fact that they've loaded up so much debt makes them vulnerable to another major shock. All right. We have another major incident like what we had a few years ago. With all of the debt, they're not as flexible, right? They might not be able to pull through another major shock to the company. So there's that risk that Phil Town just isn't comfortable with given the current situation of Boeing's debt. The next major shock, they may not be able to get additional capital, right? Because they're more risky now from a lender's perspective. And what I see in their balance sheet stacking up $25 billion of cash makes me think they're worried about the next shock as well. Okay, so let's just take a peek at what that cash position over time looks like. So we're going to go up here on the balance sheet to total cash and short-term investments going back 9 years basically here. So you can see 13, 15, 13 down to 8, 26 basically in 2020. Okay, 26 billion in cash. Right now they're at 21 billion in cash. So it's a pretty conservative cash position on the balance sheet, right? So it's a concern, This may be a sign management sees potential problems coming, right, to where they have such a high cash position. But they also have a very large debt position, which does not, make them resilient if there is another major shock. So it sounds like Phil Town has lost some confidence in management with Boeing. So sold the entire position, at least according to what he said in this podcast episode. If you want to take a listen for yourself, I encourage you. It really starts at about 11 minutes and 45 seconds. And it's just a 5-minute, piece on Boeing for Phil Town. So, big news, breaking news. It's a big position for Phil Town, no longer in Boeing. Monish Pabrai, after studying great investors and what caused the investments, what their biggest mistakes were, what caused those investments to go south was too much debt. And that's really what Phil Town is seeing right now in Boeing. So just wanted to share this with you guys while it's hot off the press. Let me know if you guys own Boeing and what you're seeing in terms of what management is doing, how you're seeing that investment. I'd be very curious to hear from you. I know a lot of you follow Phil Town. Some of you may have followed him into Boeing. Michael Burry, I believe, bought Boeing back in 2020. I don't know if he still owns it, but clearly there's been some interest from great investors in Boeing. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. And that's all I got for today. I will see you in the next video. Take care.